far as I can tell, we are. I've got a few different things. We're going to have a little countdown timer next week. As you notice, we've just been able to work out how to get the background and then to bring me in. I'm excited today. I've got this, obviously, my little overlay, which we will bring back up. But I don't need that for now because we have a co-host. This is our first guest of the show. But let me bring in my good friend. Hopefully need no introduction. But here we go. There he is.
Hi, mate. How you doing?
Coburn. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
My co-host for today. Now, let me try and work out how to get us both side by side. Now, we did this before without any problem. I can bring me into the side there. But now, where's my side by side gone? It's all falling apart here on Tuning It Over already.
Just put me in the corner.
No, I don't want to. So I want to.
There we go. There we go.
Happy days. Right, that's better.
Now we're rocking. What a privilege to be the first guest as well.
I know. Well, it's the whole point is that we want to try and respond and react to things and talk about topical topics, but it's all well and good saying it's easy. It's proofs in the pudding. Was it easy to join us today, apart from me not being able to do that then?
Yeah. Click the link.
Click the link. That's what we like to hear. So therefore, it's going to be easy enough even to get people that might make a comment early in the show, and we can even get them on for the latter part of it. It's going to be that quick, that easy, up to 10 people even. I think that's a bit busy. But yeah. One of the key things really was to try and get you on to sort of further the conversation from yesterday. It really was, I brought up the idea of sort of value around the price point that people were worried about with first contact practice, but it quite rightly sort of moves to this concept of value generally for roles and things. And it was sort of really interesting discussion of which you contributed to. What's your sort of take on that in terms of professionals being valued in MSK practice?
Yeah, so as I said to you, just as we were having a little chat before, I've been and looked at some numbers because I didn't want to come in ill-informed. I think generally most people would agree that, and it's probably universal across lots of different professions, people generally feel undervalued in the work. But I think that's particularly pertinent in healthcare. And I wouldn't single out necessarily MSK professions. I think it's something across all healthcare professions. So can I throw some numbers at you? Can we start there?
I'm excited that you did some research. So yeah, dish out some data.
Right. So UK average salary, and this is regardless of profession, sector, any of that stuff, 26k in 2020 pre-pandemic. Okay.
And that is mean.
Yeah, that's the average. Yeah.
Wow.
The mean. Right. Then when we go to look at by qualification level, and this is median, so it throws it a little bit, but median of a postgraduate is 42k, so someone with a master's or above, and a graduate 34. Okay, so just stopping there for a second, when you look at the amount of people in band 5, band 6 roles that are earning below median salary for graduates, yeah, it's a profession where there's enhanced responsibility, registration, ongoing learning, etc., and of course the whole thing with value to society. That one's a little bit damning, I feel. And you can also look at starting graduate salaries, which was another interesting thing to kind of go digging away at. So starting graduate, top one legal, obviously 40k, financial and professional services 30k, digital and IT 30k, energy 27. All of them are higher, and healthcare didn't even make the list. So there are more on there. Healthcare didn't make the list. So, I think when you look at it in the context of wider society, definitely undervalued.
So what I always think that people are going to get bored on this show particularly, but even followers of Physio Matters and me will have heard me say this before, but I always break things down, if I have to, into two categories of analysis and then proposed solution. And I want to get to the solution piece in a bit, but it's like on analysis, I'm not going to disagree with any of that data, but it's more that do you accept my point that I made yesterday about the relevance when analysing these things as to understand the sector by sector piece does make a difference to not just the analysis, but also what we might propose as a solution. Now, it's not an excuse, by the way, because I'm mortified by that. I agree broadly on the undervalued bit, but before we even get to solutions, I think the analysis, sometimes it gets missed, the fact that there is a relevance to MSK professions being cross-sector, and that once there's a majority within the public sector, it's a different kettle of fish than the market mechanisms that can affect wage labour. So
this is the thing, isn't it? So public sector pay, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a police officer, is a political football. It's not based on any kind of value to society. It's not based on any kind of commercial value or supply and demand. It's purely a politically driven decision. And the option to say give X% pay rise to public sector workers, can cause quite a stir. And it becomes a touchy subject, and definitely that gets used because that's the majority. That gets used as the benchmark, doesn't it? In most cases.
Well, it's funny because it's like, what are the mechanisms of which, it's like, how arbitrary is it? It's almost the minimum amount that the government could pay for people to still turn up and not go on strike every 5 minutes, right? It's almost like because that's the thing, you are consensually technically giving your labour up to a public sector job. But whilst that exists alongside a private sector, means that the mechanisms are skewed compared to some of the other industries that we talked about. And the legal profession was an example that you used on the chat yesterday, and I understand why you did. But it's just that it's such a different animal when it comes to how not just society values it, but how it attributes value to it with regards to financial gain on salary. Because there's an absolutely relevant point, just for the sake of devil's advocacy here, that the public sector salary across MSK professions, fair enough, but the leisure time given through annual leave or other perks. I've got my wife on maternity leave, and obviously very appreciative of the benefits that come with that at the moment. For as you do actually, but the opportunity, Charlotte being a full-time NHS paediatric specialist. That is hugely, that those benefits are significant in the public sector that have a cash value if we needed to. If we needed to try and work that out.
That's true, but don't do a disservice to the good private sector employers who also provide excellent pension benefits, holidays, add-ons. They do exist.
I've never heard of it. I've never heard of parity there. I agree. I hope to think I am one, but I'm just meaning that in this instance, I've never heard. I mean, unless this is where you can correct me. Do you know of sports clubs and some of your BASRAP members that are privately employed, or even any of you or your staff that have parity?
I think sports clubs is a bit of a stretch. I don't know how you want to class academic institutions, but I certainly think universities are pretty fair on terms and comparable to public sector. Certainly personally, comparable terms to public sector. So
that's a mixed economy as well, though, isn't it?
It is. Education policy,
the education and the parity that they have with regards to the way that matches up with holidays in teaching schedules and stuff. So it doesn't discredit your point at all. I'm just meaning that I think if we just go like for like, I'm intrigued here because I don't know the answer, but it's just that I wasn't meaning to, in case you heard it there, that I was sort of suggesting that there isn't, that there's the huge gulf as standard, and that the private employers that don't give annual leave out as part of their contracts is not my point. But it's more that I'll admit, and I remember it, especially when it's different now. I imagine if I was full-time in the NHS, especially at the moment, there's nothing more deserved than that time off, don't get me wrong. But I remember putting in applications to have leave bought off me by my bosses and stuff. Like I had more than I could take. It felt excessive. I felt lazy. I'm a different animal now than I were in my mid-20s, but it was just something that had leave coming out of my ears.
This stuff certainly happens. I mean, I'll take the example of my wife, Laura. So Laura is a community learning disability nurse for MFT, Manchester Foundation Trust. and obviously we're currently availing of all the benefits of her working for the NHS because we've just had our little one. So maternity leave's been great, etc., etc. Now, prior to that, she used to work in a clinical role for Bupa. And to be fair to Bupa, not only was she on a much better salary than she would have been at in an equivalent level in the NHS, and significantly better. You know, she was only like a few days worth of holiday short. She had excellent pension, private healthcare for me and her, you know. So I take your point, and I definitely agree that some private sector employers will milk it for all they can get, but others won't. And I think because at the end of the day, staff wouldn't go.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that's how the market plays, isn't it, at the moment? But let's get into some solutions then. In terms of the central value proposition of what we bring and how we can then, because it sounds like, for the sake of this at least, you know, even when I'm trying to be devil's advocate, it's like I accept and agree that as a general rule, the patients that we see and the pain and suffering that they have, and the way in which we can help them through rehabilitation to function better in their lives and society and getting back to work and getting participating and also getting them to reduce their comorbidities. It's a huge cash value to society that I think is under-recognised, under-respected and underpaid. We're agreeing.
Cost to work, is it 37 billion MSK?
Absolutely, yeah. Like nothing but just stats coming at me. I can't keep up.
It'll kill me if I've got that one wrong.
No, absolutely.
Thinking back, it's a big number. The cost of the economy from work days lost to MSK is massive.
Yeah, it's massive. Absolutely, it should be something that's wielded more than it is, in terms of justification for improvements in policy in our direction. So what though? When it comes to just to make sure we get back to that point about undervalue and how we can stop those adverts that make us all wince going out, what do you feel are the key mechanisms for trying to correct for that?
I mean, it's above my pay grade for a start, isn't it? But it's not going to change until the system starts failing, is it? And you could argue that we're probably nearly at that point now, where we have so many vacant positions across various professions in the NHS that systems are starting to struggle, and ultimately patients are starting to struggle, and you then have to go, so what's the solution? So if we increase salaries, improve working conditions, the staff come back, and can we improve services and etc. But it's all centrally funded from taxpayers' money. So there has to be a policy change somewhere. Clearly, a pay rise is needed. What drives it? I don't know. What do you use? What's the stick to poke the politicians with? I don't know. I'm guessing that in the current climate, it would be the economical argument that would win through. So that, cost saving to society, obviously long-term conditions is a flavour of the day, obesity. Can we keep people more active? Yes, we can. Can we reduce their risk of diabetes and being obese? Yes, we can. So there's probably a few angles.
Well, one of the things that, Paula's just made a really lovely point on the chat, and Paula, I will definitely be getting to that in a second, so do bear with me. But when it comes to that bigger picture value, and therefore all the price points is definitely one that you're making there. But when it comes to employers of all across the board, really, the adverts that I'm on about is where someone is employing someone into what is a role or a title or a responsibility set that is being then put into of a pay band if the NHS, or just feels like the salary point is not recognised as being appropriate for the level of responsibility that is being taken on. And it feels like, instinctively we look at it, and subjectively we all feel like that seems a low set of not just salary but also just other gains. It just feels like there's an imbalance there, and when it comes to how, obviously I spoke yesterday about how do we write that, feels difficult. And one of the levers that we can pull, which is a poor lever, but it's one of the only ones we have, is that we should be making the case that people shouldn't be applying into that.
Yeah, that takes collective responsibility though, doesn't it? Because if 80% go, oh, we're not applying, we've still got 20% in the queue wanting the job, particularly for ones that are seen as in some way prestigious, and I'm probably referring to sport there. But there's probably a responsibility on our shoulders as well. And when I say our, I'm referring to professional associations, and particularly those that are unions. That's kind of their job, is to advocate for better working conditions for their members. And it is a difficult thing to do. Can you challenge everyone that you see? Probably not. Would you be successful with everyone that you see? Probably not. But I think there's definitely a responsibility to try. And that's something for me personally to reflect on with our team back at BASRAT. And, how do we do that to advocate for our members and MSK clinicians across the board? And I'd like to think that other professional associations would be wanting to do the same for their members.
Well, there's two sides to that collective responsibility where it behaves as if individual choice to not apply, but then you need to do that en masse. It's that even if it was 90% and 10% didn't tag along and therefore exploited the opportunity to therefore have a shorter list or pile of applications, I'd say that there's just two sides to it. There's the act of not applying and therefore trying to have some solidarity with yourself and your colleagues to make sure we don't get undervalued. But then I would say the bit that's more contentious is the fact that when inevitably some do, and so they do recruit into that post, it's the fact that I think that there needs to the same collection of people that made that point to not apply or to make the point that you shouldn't, need to also then, and it's difficult because even the language feels tough, but there needs to be an appropriate level of judgment applied to said individuals that do it, and some degree of social consequence. Now, I'm not saying they should be pilloried or ridiculed or there should be anything nasty, but I'm just meaning that there should be some at least moral consequence to that, whilst we don't have the other upstream mechanisms. And if the unions and societies and regulators can't necessarily or aren't doing anything in that direction, we are going to be suffering to the lowest common denominator there on those sorts of roles. And I do think there is a distinction between that and some of the sporting stuff, which I want to come to because Paul has made this lovely point. But, do you get twitchy, as sometimes I do, over that next step where there needs to be almost a recognition that role is less prestigious for those reasons we talked about?
I guess so, but I guess I'd be uncomfortable with passing moral judgment on individuals for taking a particular job role because everyone's got their own reasons. What I'm more comfortable with is publicly judging and calling out corporations and organisations that are willing to put jobs out and hire people at those salaries. That's definitely more acceptable. And if that's being done with organisations that are bothered about their public image, then maybe it would have an effect. But it's not the way you'd want to go about it, is it? You'd want to go about it constructively and positively rather than kind of beating people with sticks. But I guess to a point, have we run out of options in that regard?
Yeah, I just think that, of course it's simpler, it's easier, it feels more pleasant, calling out a faceless, nameless corporation than it is an individual who may have good justification for doing it in that particular thing. But I think at least asking them to justify it would be a smart move. I feel like we need we need some level of accountability in the system. Now, I want to get to Paula's point because it speaks to your sporting side. Now, it won't show the whole thing on screen, so I'll read it out. But Paula Clayton, obviously, many of you will know of her as a really well-established and experienced sports physiotherapist and massage therapist, sports therapist, variety of hats that she wears, no doubt. I chose to work there for the poor. She was talking about elite sport. Sorry, there's a bit that missing for this. So she worked in elite sport for many years, as we all know. She chose to work there for poor income because it gave me what I needed with regards to self-satisfaction, travel involvement, the other perks that you mentioned earlier. It's not for everyone, and it's not an easy ride. I had job satisfaction, but also the luxury of running a private practice when home. Yeah. So that I had a private income. I don't agree with the salary options within the NHS, but what are the other options for newly qualified physios? How do we address the underpaid, undervalued situation? So a great contribution, but I just do want to thrash out with you a little bit this notion of the other added benefits, the reputational gains, the fact that by doing that for a period of time, underpaid, arguably, there might be other things that come downstream of that. So general take.
From personal experience, so I've worked in professional sport and done so pro bono, and a bit like Paula, at the same time I was running a private practice, and the sporting organisation that I was working from, we were quite fortunate in that we were able to leverage their reputation and the X thousand fans that we'd get at each game to give my business exposure, and that then indirectly kind of paid me and benefited me. So I was early on in my business and early on in my career at that point. So there was other motivators other than what they were going to pay me. And I also appreciate that people need to start somewhere. And although we don't agree with it or advocate for it from a salary perspective, if that's how you're going to get experience that eventually gets you into a well-paid job in sport, then sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do. And like Paula says, money isn't the only aspect. Yes, it's the only thing that buys you food in the supermarket. I can't buy that with good vibes. Stash, yeah. But certainly when I did it, so from experience, I had a great time. I made loads of friends. So yeah, pros and cons. Experience is important as well, isn't it? It definitely made me a better clinician, which in turn made me better in private practice.
I find it really fraught, this issue, because I have to stop myself from succumbing to all of that logic in not. I know it sounds funny, but especially with all the things we've got going on with Physio Matters and Therapy Live and MSKR and various other opportunities for experience, exposure, using it as a leapfrog for CVs to other things. It's not quite the same as professional sport, don't get me wrong, but for those that are interested, you can imagine and we do have a fantastic, voluntary workforce, and that's great, but it's just that we could be exploiting free labour if we were to have interns on contracts and obligations, because that's the thing, we have a voluntary team and network that opt in and opt out of various different tasks. It's a different atmosphere than the natural contracted labour that also happens to be pro bono or voluntary. It's that it takes for a really, it just feels like a real grey area, because it just, these are things that usually from companies that can certainly afford minimum wage, at least, which brings with it employment rights. And I just think that that's where I get twitchy, volunteering into projects that are super flexible, which have just sort of really deliverables that you can do as of when on your own time. Whereas the roles that I know we've all volunteered into, they often come with quite particular obligations and time commitments and professionalism. I feel like my bias and even my politics suggests that I think that there should be a base level of money changing hands rather than just tracksuits.
Yeah, and I'm not saying otherwise. I guess the point I was making is that I can definitely understand why it happens, and I've been there, I've done it. Now, yes, we need to move to a point where it's at least minimum wage. Obviously, we do, because that's what's going to be better for the profession, and that's what's going to be better for individuals. How do you do it? It's the same thing, I think, isn't it? It's publicly shaming, and I've actually seen quite a bit of that going on recently as well. I got involved in one myself, partly through lack of understanding, but it was, was it the head physio and head doc for Team GB went out the other week through EIS, and it was a voluntary role, but turned out that it was basically a secondment, so they were only really after anyone that already worked for EIS, and you'd still get paid as long as they were happy to release you out of your contract. But hundreds of people jumped on it and hammered them, and I think maybe the more that happens, the more clubs will think about it before putting that out. Yeah,
I think so, but it's also that a bit clumsy, really, for when the facts of the matter weren't quite as accurate as what was presented in the advert, but also that, as you mentioned before, it doesn't 100 people being outraged about it doesn't necessarily change the matter. So it's a fascinating one. There's some lovely comments going on, and Gemma and Paula are making some really good points here around the sort of challenges and benefits here of being involved. Sometimes to what would be considered underpaid, and therefore the associated undervalued. Now, there is a real difference there that I think is worth us mentioning, that being underpaid doesn't mean you're being undervalued, particularly locally to that that instance, you could be a really highly valued member of staff. Granted that he's then being underpaid, but that's how you prove your salt and then move into other roles within that may be better paid. But it's kind of that it sometimes does come for the ride that you're volunteering your time, and therefore sometimes you are naturally more disposable, quite literally more disposable, and that concerns me. But I think on a broader level, there are two conversations. I think it is different as to what we would do about it and how we analyse these sorts of things we're talking about compared to when a Band 8 job is advertised at Band 6 because they're just chancing it. Yeah. And therefore there's a plucky aspiring Band 7, 8 that then takes it on as a 6th because that comes with a title and the right badge that then means they could potentially sidestep, and it looks like a sidestep when actually it's a climb. These are relevant politicking between contracted businesses, and especially what was being shown on social media was examples where these were companies that were using and leveraging titles in a way that was misleading, and that whilst not protected titles are things that come with an understanding socially within the professions that therefore you gotta make sure we catch that up and get that improved on. We've only got a few minutes left, mate. Wanted to give you, if you can, and I think just by throwing it out there, you might be able to frame some conversations, no doubt, next week. Yeah. What do you see as another thing that you've been working on recently is the ways in which NHS and private practice, we know that they are not appropriately linked and don't get the best out of each other, but in these times we need to improve that. So I know we're not going to have time to get into it now, but what do you see as being the optimal future for the sectors to interact better?
So it's context specific because it's in the frame of COVID recovery and currently NHS services still only kind of gradually creeping back, starting to see patients again. So we know that there's, and this is from kind of professions linked into Armour, so probably not the most accurate figure, but approximately 15,000 private practitioners in MSK across the UK. So big workforce there. And currently this massive backlog of people that have missed operations, joint replacements, have been developing MSK issues that should have been seen in secondary care and just haven't been able to because it's been shut, who are now seeking private services. And we know that that's happening because there's feedback from practitioners across professions that they are seeing an increase in patients that would have otherwise had NHS services. What we need to do is potentially try and formalise that a bit with the public sector and try and have a mechanism in place whereby after appropriate triage, whatever badge you want to put on that, the private sector becomes a vehicle for secondary care where secondary care capacity doesn't exist in a particular area. So the framework for actually doing that obviously needs bashing out, but the idea in principle, if it's acceptable, I think needs to be taken forward, especially in the times we're in at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the times mean that I'm more hopeful for that than I have been before. But it's something that there's some weird flavors of snobbery that cut both ways. Really, they don't communicate sometimes even on the same language. Some therapists and managers and policymakers cross sector. Passing some serious judgment that's not accurate to the realities. But similarly, these are, whilst I'm hopeful, as I said, because of the timing, I do think there's such a fascinating thing that imagine for a couple of years we'd managed to correct for some of the we'd reduce the unwarranted variation, and there wasn't such a scale and scope across MSK practice that's not an interest in diversity, but is just like from nonsense to sense, right? If we'd have sorted that out, it'd feel like it'd be a smoother transition, but I'm kind of concerned the fact that we haven't. It just feels like that it could open a can of worms, and if we got it wrong in this instance, it'd be really hard. It'd be many years until we got got nearer to what would be sensible co-working between sectors. So whilst I'm hopeful, and I think that those tests and pilots need to happen, and I agree that they will do, let's not pretend it's not going to have its challenges.
There's a whole host of things that any particular framework would need to address, not least the issue of access.
Yeah, absolutely.
And fair access for everybody.
No doubt we will be chewing that over plenty of times in weeks to come. Thank you so much for your time today, mate, for coming on and co-hosting with me. I'm going to try and do a fancy exit, and so I'm going to clear you off. Wave goodbye.
See you, mate.
Ollie will be back. Thanks for coming.
Good.
Cut him off as he was saying by that. That was rude. But right, so this is me trying to do a fancy exit. I'm trying to keep to time. It looks like half an hour to me. Thank you all for joining. And what I will do is I'm just testing this as an exit, because we're going to try and get a little countdown video and stuff. So I'm going to try and count myself out using what is the stock countdown. I don't know why, but it's 27-second countdown. But thank you for joining. This has been our first week. We missed one. We've had 3 on the bounce that seem to have worked well. And so I'll be seeing you next Monday for more Chewing It Over. So take care.